Happy Wednesday to all. I'm sitting here on Monday listening to Marcus Freeman's press conference. I get a bang on the door. It's the UPS man thinking, all right, what did the wife order now? What are the kids getting? It actually has a box with my name on it. Like, holy cow, it's the third time this year I actually have a package for me. Open it up. None other than a beautiful bottle. Let me get it right there. Teeling whiskey. You see the Irish whiskey there. The nice Notre Dame logo. The light is shining out there. And I'm thinking, man alive, where were you at 5:30 on Saturday afternoon? Somebody that can talk to us about the whiskey, somebody that can talk to us about, I don't know, the highs and lows of winning big games and losing some heartbreakers in Notre Dame Stadium, none other than the guy who you see when you look up pretty much every Notre Dame passing record, Brady Quinn. Nice enough to join us this afternoon. What's up, Brady?
Not much, although I'm right there with you. As we said before the show started, I felt like it was either going to be a big one where we're celebrating with some teeling, or it was going to be a devastating loss where there is some teeling drank. But hopefully, is that one of the limited edition bottles where Notre Dame and Teeling have collaborated to put the Notre Dame logo or emblem on the small batch?
Yeah, it's the bottle right there in itself. I mean, I know the light's getting in there a little bit of the way, but
yeah.
Gorgeous bottle, looks fantastic. Can't wait to sample some, hopefully after a victory sometime here, hopefully and soon against Purdue. But I was kind of thinking, just kind of starting you off. I was right in the same boat as you. I said 11-1. John, I know who's with us. He has high expectations for this team. You went on the record as saying 11-1 was kind of the baseline for this team this year. After a loss like that to Northern Illinois, how do you even start to kind of sort out what an expectation is for this team for all year when you don't necessarily know what it is, I guess?
Well, I still think that's my expectation for this team. I think you look at Florida State, that doesn't look at as difficult of a game as we thought it was going to be coming into the season. Georgia Tech probably looks more difficult, as does Louisville. USC probably was going to be the greatest challenger, outside of having to go on the road to College Station to start the season. Now it's going to be LA and playing in that environment versus a team that looks like it's only gaining momentum right now in Southern Cal, as they've made the fixes they needed to on defense and offensively up front. They're actually running the football there. So big-time changes for Southern Cal makes them a much more formidable opponent. And who knows what that means when it's all said and done for Notre Dame's aspirations for going to the playoff. But I've still got a lot of confidence in this team, because I think what we've seen now in 2 weeks of football is the high and the low, right? And hopefully we can play somewhere closer to what we saw in week one and improve upon that. But being able to go down and beat what I still believe to be a good Texas A&M football team and their, in their stadium against that crowd still tells me a lot about this team. And I think, even though there's no other way to put it. It was a historical loss, a historical disappointment for Notre Dame fans, for the players, for the coaches, for everyone involved. There's nothing you can do about it now. I mean, not even reassessing it, to be honest with you. You got to clear up the mistakes and move forward, because you got a Purdue team that also doesn't have high expectations, but it's coming off a bye. And so you better believe any little mistake that you made in that game versus Northern Illinois, it's going to show up against Purdue. They're going to test you on it. They're going to see if you've made those fixes to it. And to be quite honest with you, I think they've got a much more capable passer too at quarterbacks compared to what we saw from Northern Illinois. So I think, look, the secondary is up for the task, but the reality is every single game to me is going to be a dogfight for Notre Dame moving forward, based on what we saw this past week.
Yeah, it's Brady. There's no team in America that has had this big of an emotional swing. You are the toast of the town week one, game of the week. You win that ball game, you get all that credibility. Everybody's flying high. 1 week later, the unthinkable happens. And so you went from extremely as high as you could get to as low as you could get. How do you center yourself and then get ready for whatever comes next?
Well, the toughest thing is, as a player, you want to kind of thrive off that emotion, and you want to be able to play and feed into that at times when it makes sense to. But then at other times, you have to make sure you raise up, that same level of energy, even for those teams that are maybe your lesser opponents, as you'd view at Northern Illinois, for example. And I think that's the hard thing is, after looking at the emotional win and everyone feeling like that was a huge step for the program, unfortunately, we didn't stay there. And I know it's hard to stay at that level for the entirety of the season, but you're Notre Dame. Like, you get everyone's best shot. Like, the Northern Illinois walk in there saying, this is what makes our career. This is what makes our memories from, playing in Notre Dame Stadium versus the Fighting Irish. And so moving forward, Notre Dame always has to keep that in the back of their mind. When you're a player on this team, you have to go out there and understand every single day you have something to prove. And not just to your fan base, everyone on the outside, but to yourself too. When you're wearing that helmet, can you live up to the expectations of that? And that's the challenge. Is this team obviously has to make a bunch of fixes, and that's on both sides of the ball, all three phases. But you're also looking at, I think this group in the locker room, the players, they've got to find a way, the leaders in that locker room coming out and not allowing that to be the case where you can be up and ready for the moment to be able to seize that moment in College Station. But then on your home opener, the second time in 3 years, you're going to allow a lesser opponent to come in to your house and be able to physically dominate and really out execute you throughout the course of the game. That to me, it's tough to swallow as a former player because, looking back on it, like those are games you're never going to lose. You're always going to walk into it saying, I'm not going to, as a player, let them beat me. I don't care what the scheme looks like. I don't care what the scoreboard looks like. We're going to find a way at the end to win this one because we're just a flat out more talented, better team. And that's the unfortunate part is you didn't kind of see that fire. You didn't see that sort of energy, from the team when it was all said and done. So they've got to, in the locker room, those players have to get together and the leaders have to come to an agreement that they're not going to let this happen anymore. Every single week, you're going to be out there seeing their best as far as their energy, their enthusiasm, and everything else that comes involved with trying to win football games.
How much of that kind of falls on the leadership, the veterans? How much of that falls on a head coach that's now in his third year and has kind of been through this before?
I mean, look, I've always been a guy who puts probably more onus, more accountability on the players because you're ultimately the ones out there that are out there expected to execute. You're the ones that are out there that are expected to make a fix if something goes wrong. I kind of go back to the Ohio State game last year, only having 10 on the field. Well, if you're one of those linebackers, and by the way, all these kids are really smart. All these young men, these are student athletes who are able to go into those classrooms at Notre Dame and listen and learn and be a part of some of the brightest minds you'll find in our country. And you're telling me you don't just run up into the offensive line, take a penalty, and go, we need someone else in here. Like it bothered me last year seeing that. And so this year, looking at it saying, there needs to be more accountability amongst the guys on this football team to make the agreement and that pact between themselves that they're not going to let something like that happen again. So that's what I think everyone, at least I'm going to be most focused for to see this season versus Purdue, because another game where they're a double-digit favorite, I think I saw at some point, a team that's going to be very much prepared to take them on, coming off a bye, and they should win this game. They should win this game somewhat handily, and they've got to make against some of those fixes we talked about.
Yeah, it's just a tricky spot to be in, 2 weeks in year 3 of a tenure, really tricky spot. And let me ask you, Brady, we're looking at this Notre Dame offense right now and some of the struggles with it. Week 1 was a really tough opponent and you understood it was going to be tough to move the ball around. Now you're looking into kind of week 2 and you're seeing some of that stress. People are debating whether it's a quarterback thing, a philosophy thing, an O-line thing, a receiver thing. But what do you see there to kind of that we could pull this together here and get on track?
Well, that's the thing. This stuff takes time. People tend to forget, Riley Leonard just got here. He transfers in the offseason and he wasn't able to play in the spring game. And that hurts, like getting those live or closer to live game rep scenarios. You obviously have an offensive line that's young and they're still learning as they go. You have new wide receivers as well who are developing chemistry with their quarterback, along with having a better understanding for the offense and how that's all going to work. So the hardest part about this is with so much change in college football, you don't get those preseason games to iron out some of the kinks, and you get it right into the season, and you're expected to execute at a high level, especially when you play a team like Texas A&M week 1. So you're looking for improvement from week 1 to week 2, week 2 to week 3. And it's one of the reasons why, I don't want to, I know the focus has always been on, hey, let's talk about the third year and Marcus Freeman's tenure and all that. We're in the season now. We're on a week-to-week focus moving forward, because what I think a lot of us are feeling that are Notre Dame fans, and even a lot of college football fans who've watched their team stumble so far, is they're already thinking their team's out of the playoff. Well, we've got a 12-team expanded playoff this year. And so there's a lot of mixed emotions about it, because in our hearts, we're used to that BCS era like I played in, or the 4-team playoff where, you had 5 Power 5 conferences, so you were guaranteed a conference champ was going to get left out. Heck, even in that instance, there were still conference champions that were left out. So you really didn't know who the 4 was going to be when it was all said and done. It was up to the committee. Now you got 12. So you're going to have 2-loss teams. You're going to have probably a 3-loss team. And if you actually go through the years, I think there would have been like 16 or 18 3-loss teams would have made it in the top 12. So that's the hardest part about all this is like we want to act like the world, like the sky is falling and the world's coming to an end. It's one loss. And I think the biggest thing is offensively, they just have to keep taking strides, improving and finding their identity. And the hard part about that is it's really tough when nothing goes right. And it felt like nothing was really going right last week. So I think you have to get back to what your identity is. That's running the football, leaning on the offensive line, this talented group. Yes, they're young, but they're developed, they're talented. You have 2 backs that, in my opinion, really the entire running back room, Coach McCall has done such a tremendous job with them. They're as talented as ever. So lean on that group as the passing game continues to develop, and you kind of move forward through there because you've got the foundation with your defense. You've got, again, those 2 groups, the running back room, obviously the offensive line, tight ends. Like those are the 2 consistencies I think we can build for moving forward. But again, the world's not coming to an end. Like there's potentially even another loss on the schedule that could happen, and you could still potentially make it in as one of those top 12 teams.
So you mentioned there just a little bit of it taking time, and obviously, Riley Leonard misses almost all the spring and is spending the summer trying to get caught up with his teammates. Does that weigh more one way or the other then? Like in this era where, like you're seeing Miami have huge success. They go to the transfer portal, have quarterback success right away. They look like they're in the discussion for a top 5 team right now. Notre Dame's having struggles, part of it probably due to Leonard missing most of the spring and being iffy throughout the summer. Like, is there more of a need, I guess, for stability at quarterback developing from within or not, I suppose?
Well, look, I mean, I think your ideal scenario is you have guys who commit as high school players. They come in, they get developed, and they know the program. Tom Brady talked a lot about this being one of the issues that I think he sees just and it extends up to the NFL level is, when you're a young player, you come into a program and you're in that program. So you're learning how to be a student away from your parents, right? Where you're not in this home environment where someone's telling you to do your homework or telling you to work on your project or study for your test. You got to figure that stuff out on your own. Same thing as obviously an athlete, like how you're going about making sure you get to your training, you're eating the right things, you're getting to bed early, like getting the right rest, nutrition, recovery, all those things. And the program helps you kind of develop into that young person that you're looking for. And then on top of that, you're trying to learn a system. And so, I still recall going back in the springtime, you're working on drops, 3, 5, 7-step drops. You're working on your boots. You're working on play action fakes. You're working on all these things that are part of the system that you're going to be running or planning to run for the entirety of why you're there. Now, granted, I had a coaching change 2 years into it. So I only had 2 years of that. But, even with that, like still all the time that I had taken to really focus on both those offenses, I didn't have everything else that was changing out around me with transferring and dealing with all that. So that's, I think, one of the things that makes it difficult for some kids who come in and try to assimilate to the culture, to the education, to a new surrounding and environment, and then trying to all of a sudden learn a new offense and system. And you're catching balls from a guy that maybe you've only caught balls, from for a few months. All those things, again, are just really hard to come together. So I think ideally, if you look at the way college football is set up, high school recruits are more like your draft. And I think most teams would say at the NFL level, they build their teams through the draft. You supplement with free agency. And I think in college, that's something similar. High school, and you supplement in with the transfer portal. So look, as far as who the guys are, whether it was Sam Hartman last year or Riley Leonard this year, that's up to Marcus, that's up to Chad Bowden, guys who make that decision as far as, who they want on their football team, how they're going about selecting them. So they would be much better to answer that question. For me personally, though, being a guy who chose to go to Notre Dame, loved even the hardships because I think it made me a better player. It made me a better husband and father, and it taught me a lot of lessons about the game of football and life through that time. I think that's ideally how you'd like to have it done. And I think that's probably how it's going to be moving forward at Notre Dame, most likely after this year.
Brady, how do you, as the long-term traditional Notre Dame quarterback, in-house guy and all that, how do you look at this new era of college football where it feels a lot more like free agency, wheeling and dealing, coming for a year, leaving? There's money, there's big time money out there thrown around, and that kind of brings with it some egos and expectations, and players have more autonomy than they ever had before. And guys like you and Goolsby, you missed the window on the big NIL deals you guys could have had. How do you look at this as a guy that was kind of at the end of that old traditional run of what we thought of college football to where it's at now? How do you process this modern game we're in?
It's hard, honestly,
Yeah.
because, I worked at the Canum Center there on campus. I worked at the Office of News and Information on my off days, even during season, because I needed a little extra spending money. Your stipend only went so far as rent and utilities and food and gas, especially my senior year when I lived off campus. So all those things were stressors. There are things that none of these young men and young women really have to worry about anymore with NIL. So there's an element, I think, of jealousy there of just being like, man, if I was born about 20 years later, how different things would be. But at the same time, I think the tough thing is because of this era of football, and I'm not saying this is the case in Notre Dame because I don't believe it to be the case, but it is at some schools. And I'm not going to name any in particular, but I think you can look around the college landscape and see who this is. But they tend to be much more transactional relationships instead of transformational. And that's the problem is, when I went to college, I transformed as a young man into an adult. And I credit the University of Notre Dame for a lot of that. And that was ultimately what I was looking for, from an academic standpoint, from an athletic standpoint, but also spiritually. And so that was the calling to me. The hard thing now is, with this NIL era, you can almost call kids mercenaries at times because they're going there to do the job. They're getting paid X, and that's why they're there. They're not there for all the other things that make college football great or make it special. And I think that's the hard part is, there's almost like this blend now of college football becoming somewhat like the NFL. And the toughest part about it is the things that differentiated college football from the NFL is what makes it great. It's like all the things that the NFL doesn't have. And I was just talking about this with LeVar Arrington this morning, who was obviously a college football Hall of Famer and was a Pro Bowler in the NFL. Like college football is just more fun. And it's more fun because of the band, the traditions, like the feeling around it, just being around young people and all the optimism and everything else that goes along with it. Whereas it feels like with a business transaction, it's like, you're constantly looking at like, am I getting back what I'm putting into this? On both sides of that. And I think that's the tough part about it is, it becomes about the money. And when it becomes about the money, it takes away, to me at least, from the fun of it, the developmental portion of it. And so it's hard for me to look at it and navigate it. But I also think there's the other end of the conversation where if you don't adapt, you're going to die. I mean, again, not maybe in that,
well, it's like survive and advance, essentially.
Essentially, not to make it that drastic, but look at Clemson. Clemson's been a team that has not utilized the portal. And go look at their lack of success over the last, 4 or 5 years or so far compared to what it was before NIL became a part of it. The transfer portal became a piece of how you build your roster. And Dabo Swinney wants to build his program that way. That's great. But we've got an incredible young man in Bo Collins who made a huge play week 1 to help us win that football game, in large part because of the portal and because we saw so much value in a guy like Bo. So that's the other end of it where it creates opportunity. And I'm all for that because I think you look at some other teams too, where, hey, the quarterback's there, but he's not playing. He goes to a lower, group of 5 team or something like that. He's playing. He's helping out, build up that program. You can go across and look at Bowling Green State versus Penn State. Bazelak for Bowling Green, who spent some time at Mizzou. He goes in. He gives Bowling Green a chance of upsetting Penn State. Darn near did. And so, like a lot of what we're seeing, at least in today's college football, has created more parity or at least more competition with some of the smaller schools where if they couldn't compete with the bigger schools in recruiting, they can now a little bit with the portal and NIL, everything else that goes along with it. So that the fact that there's more opportunity for the student athletes is something that I love. And for some of these guys that the career's pretty much going to end in college, they're not going to have much of an NFL career. It does provide them the chance to have a little extra money in their pockets too and profit off this, which, probably should have been the case all along. It took us a while to get here.
Yeah, that makes sense. Brady, the last thing that I had for you that was on my list, I wanted to touch on, you kind of alluded to it a little bit. And I want to know, how tough is it for a place like Notre Dame, as unique as we are, independent, do things our own way, longstanding tradition, values we never want to sacrifice? How hard is it for them to thread the needle with the modern era of the way things are going, with the transactional piece, the transfer portal, all the things that go into that. How hard is it to maintain our values and not want to sacrifice that, but knowing we got to play these games to stay competitive in the modern game? I feel like Notre Dame's doing a pretty good job trying to thread the needle, but how big of a challenge is that institutionally for us to do both?
It's a great question. And the truth is there's always going to be a standard at Notre Dame where we're just going to be unique. We're going to be different. And I think that's what our current, president and athletic director want to continue to uphold, as does our head football coach, because that can be an advantage. And I think oftentimes we look at the fact of our rigorous academic schedule and standards and we say, what prevents us from recruiting certain kids? And that's true. Like, that's the reality of it. But in saying that, it's like, well, we also have really smart kids and also kids who do fit the bill of being incredible athletes. I mean, think about Ben Morrison, Xavier Watts, two guys who are All-Americans. I mean, those dudes can do it all. After their long, successful NFL career that I'm projecting out for them, they'll be able to go be on a board or go run a company or whatever they want to do because of the combination of both. And so I think too often times we focus on, hey, well, this is holding us back from getting this kid. Well, let's get the best of the best kids that we can that fit what is perfect for us. Otherwise they're probably not a good fit anyway. But I would also say this, when you're looking at the academic standards, and I think that is truly our biggest hurdle, if I'm being transparent and honest. I mean, look, we get to tour around all sorts of different, college football programs every week for what I do with Big Noon Kickoff. And you get a sense of just how things work everywhere else. And, you look at it and say, well, that guy would have probably never gone to Notre Dame or probably never fit in Notre Dame for a bunch of reasons, but mostly academic. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? They're provided an opportunity to get their education somewhere else. But I think for a lot of the alums out there, you'd like to think that, we're not just going to allow a guy to come in and take classes and get a Notre Dame degree because he's playing football. You'd like to think that, hey, he's coming there to get his education, get his degree, and he's going to fit in, he's going to mix, he's going to be proud of the degree that he's getting. And I think those are the tougher conversations, because for a lot of the students out there, they take pride in their Notre Dame degree. And I think a lot of universities that battle this are like, do we really want to water that down by having someone come into our, university after being somewhere else for 3 years, 4 years, and then get a Notre Dame degree by utilizing the athletic field to do it? Those are tough conversations to have. And I think for Notre Dame, they've always kind of upheld themselves to bring in the right people who fit both, those that can do it athletically and academically. So again, it's always going to be a conversation point, but I just think we need to stop looking at it as a negative. We need to start looking at it more as something that can help us excel when we find the right people who fit, what we're trying to do right now. This roster to me is up there with the best in the country. So like, I'm not even sure that conversation should even exist at the moment, only because like we've got such a talented roster that all those kids we're bringing in are fitting the bill of what we're looking for.
You would know this as well as anyone. Like, I don't know. I link it to, I grew up being a Cubs fan. And so Wrigley Field in October would always call like this enhancer of emotion, where the Cubs are in a playoff game, things are going right. There's not a more electric building in all Major League Baseball. But the second something goes wrong, it's like fans have been programmed to just think the worst. Notre Dame Stadium feels like that largely to me of, you get there for a big game. I mean, John and I were both there for the Bush Push game, and it was like absolute insanity. You lived it. Like, tell me there's a better atmosphere in college football than what you experienced that day. Good luck. But then you've also seen the days where it's Miami of Ohio in 2 weeks coming off of a loss against Northern Illinois. And it's going to have to be a lot of the players finding that own hype in themselves, because it turns into that enhanced negative type emotion of, all right, fans aren't into it as much. Like, how real is that as a player, both, I guess, on the whole at home at Notre Dame Stadium, and then when you go on the road and it's kind of like this team's Super Bowl or championship type game?
I would just say this. I mean, look, it's hard for me to relate to that because we didn't play any Group of 5 teams back during my era. I mean, that was one of the things I loved about Notre Dame is you had those annual matchups of Purdue. That was an in-state rival. And they always had some edge rusher that was trying to tattoo you. And Michigan State was always such a nasty place. They always had tremendous talent, guys who you'd be seeing at the NFL level. And those were always tough matchups. Michigan, obviously Stanford, USC, et cetera. So it was so different, because outside of Navy, where you felt like obviously you had the advantage from a talent standpoint, but it was such a unique scheme that, like, offensively, you're like, well, I'm probably going to get the ball like 4 or 5 times this half. So I better make sure I do the best I can with the opportunities I get, because that's all you really get. They shorten the game and they make sure that if it comes down to the end, they ink the clock out and try to have a field goal to win it. So outside of Navy every year, it was like every single matchup for us was what we'd be considered now a Power 4 team. And so I never really felt that quite as much. I wouldn't weigh in on this. I do think there's a sense of weight that you carry when you put on the gold helmet. And that's because, it's been since 1988 since we've won a national championship. Now, obviously, we've had our opportunities. We've had our various seasons where we've had opportunities. And the tough part is everyone hates you on the road. That's just part of being Notre Dame. So you know exactly what to expect. What you don't expect is, the boos or the people who are frustrated or upset with you when you should be beating a team like you're talking about Northern Illinois last week or Miami of Ohio. You go into those scenarios in your home stadium thinking like everyone's for us. It's not always the case. I mean, we dominated enough in bookstore basketball to hear how some of those student athletes would talk to us when we were kicking their ass on the basketball court. So I always kept that in the back of my head. Like, as much as these guys are fans, there's still a line that's drawn when it comes down to what their expectations are for you. So I think that's part of, being the quarterback in Notre Dame, putting on that gold helmet, putting on the uniform, is their high expectations. And obviously not higher than the players and coaches themselves, but the fans are right there too, expecting excellence. And when you're not beating a team that's a group of 5 team or a team that you're a 4 touchdown favorite in, you're going to hear about it. And there's a challenge in just mentally dealing with that, I think, for all those players.
So what gets brought up before we let
privilege? That's a privilege, guys. About Notre Dame. I think that's a privilege, to be hated and to be hunted. And every week, everybody wants to take you out, whether you're home or on the road. That's a Notre Dame privilege over the decades that got built up. And it's a special thing. It's a challenge that's our cross to bear, but it's the ultimate compliment that everybody hates you everywhere you go. And every team is going to give you their best shot, no matter who. It's the ultimate privilege. It's just hard to hold it up week to week. It's a uniquely Notre Dame problem to have.
Yeah, I think that goes back to how you go about constructing your roster. I think when you're a high school student, you pick Notre Dame, you understand what you're signing up for. I mean, my final schools were Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State. 3 of the most storied programs. They're all within driving distance, obviously, of where I was from, where I lived. But growing up in Columbus, Ohio, and watching Ohio State, especially during those years where John Cooper was the head coach, it usually came down to one game, and that was Michigan. And when they weren't winning it, with all this talent, all the crazy, incredible wide receivers and players, the Eddie Georges of the world, and David Boston and Terry Glenn, Orlando Pace, I mean, watching that, like, I got a kind of sense of like, hey, that's what it's like at Ohio State. Hey, this is what it's like at Notre Dame. This is what it's like at Michigan. Like, that's ultimately what it comes down to. And I think that's the tough part, is when you have guys who come in from other schools sometimes, they're not exactly sure just how big it is and how big the hype is around it till they get there. And then you don't really fully understand it until you get into the game live scenario where, like, dang, like, this is what it's like. Yeah. It doesn't matter who's coming in that stadium. You got to expect your best, because you're going to have a bullseye on your back. Like I said, you are the historic win for every one of those programs, whether it's Northern Illinois last week or Miami of Ohio coming up. When you choose to play those opponents, I mean, it could be even some of the other teams, like guys that I know that played at Michigan State or Purdue. I mean, Stuart Schwaggart was reaching out to me this week talking about the matchup and all that. And he was a guy who I played when I was young. They got the best of me when I was young. We got the best of them when I was older. But there's still that trash talk that goes on, because it's just Notre Dame. You talked about being a privilege. It is. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to go there. It's a privilege to have that sort of pressure.
So when you're on the road then with Big Noon and you're at various Big Ten campus here, Camp Randall, whatever it might be, and fans come up to you from opposing schools that have no connection to Notre Dame, what's brought up? Is it USC in 05? Is it the comeback against UCLA, or is it just, oh, hey, you're the guy that's on that TV show I watch every Saturday?
No, not so much. I mean, mostly there's more Notre Dame fans than you think out there. It's like, if they're, for example, in Madison, Wisconsin this week, if they're Wisconsin's their team, they're like, I like Notre Dame too. Like, there's a lot more of that. And obviously they might bring up the most recent time Notre Dame played Wisconsin and how that went in Chicago. We were there for that. That was just a unbelievable day, unbelievable experience. I will never forget that, being on the sideline with Pat Connaughton and kind of catching up and talking, but then watching the team come back the way they played in that fourth quarter. So, I mean, the Chris Tyree return, just that was like one of the coolest things I've ever witnessed in person as a fan for Notre Dame. But it's not so much. There's only hate in a few spots. Michigan's definitely one where you lean into it. You get it sometimes from Ohio State just because we were playing the past couple of years, but I'm from Columbus, so it's probably not as bad as, for example, Leinart will get it once Ohio State starts playing USC. There's really no tie in there. He's this like West Coast dude that just kind of hangs out over on the beach oftentimes. So there's really like no commonalities between them and the fan base. So there'll probably be some hatred there. But yeah, it's not what you think. It's actually more, there's a little more of like, I grew up loving Notre Dame or something else. So it's a little more friendly.
Man, it's Brady. You know what else I think about too? We're all in the same age range. With that Bush push was a seminal moment in a lot of ways for a lot of us. It comes full circle when we see you guys together up there on TV. It's like this ultimate, like it messes with your mind because you're like, we remember that battle and here we are down the road and you guys are all good on TV together, have that chemistry. It comes full circle. How is that like for you? Because for us, it's like, wow, this is how far this has all come.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy part is, we've really, Matt and I have really kind of grown together. I mean, obviously, we only knew of each other because we played against each other back in college. But as our NFL careers really didn't pan out the way we would have liked, we kind of had kept in touch to a degree. And then really, once we started working at Fox, have become rather close. I mean, our families have continued to grow together. They're pregnant, expecting one. We're pregnant, expecting one too, coming up in January. So we've really had a lot of common ground with the way we've gone about just our careers, even post-career playing in the NFL, our families, and all of that. So it's been kind of crazy when you think about it, and just how different. Well, there's one thing we all agree upon is it probably didn't matter even if we beat USC and we went on to play Texas. Texas most likely would have probably won that game because Vince Young was just playing out of his mind. So I think Matt and I have both agreed. We're like, yeah, Vince probably would have found a way to beat Notre Dame too had we played in that game. It's very similar to how he beat you guys in that national championship. So that was the one thing I think we could agree upon in that season. He still has not admitted that was an illegal play since now they're vindicated because it's now a legal play. He thinks it was okay back then, I guess.
I was going to let you go, but with that, I have this crazy theory, just knowing how Heisman voting works and award voting works. If Bush doesn't push Leinart into the end zone, you win the Heisman that year.
Probably. I mean, that's kind of how things were going, I think, based on it. I mean, statistically speaking, I think I had a pretty darn good year compared to the other two guys. And we would have been, I think, positioned to play in the national championship when it was all said and done. So most likely, but at the end of the day, man, I mean, that's all hindsight. You can't control a lot of those things. I always say, too, like an award like that, even just being up for it as a finalist and everything else, it's a credit to everyone else out around me. I mean, the quarterback position is so reliant on everyone else, the offensive line, the receivers, running backs too, and all that coaching staff. So it's always fun to be, obviously I won the Maxwell the following year. It's always fun to win those awards, but they have your name on it. And really it should be so many other people that were a part of you getting it as a quarterback.
Brady, appreciate you taking the time. Teeling Whiskey and Notre Dame Athletics, they're celebrating their shared Irish heritage with a special limited edition small batch of whiskey, hand-selected. Casks of grain and malt whiskey are initially fully aged in ex-bourbon barrels, then married together in Central American rum casks for up to 12 months for a unique dried fruit profile, 46% alcohol by volume. Like I said, it's awesome.
Perfect if you want to drink it neat on the rocks. If you want to put it in a cocktail, the Irish Highball is the Fighting Irish Highball is what I like to go with. We kind of rolled it out this summer at the Golic charity event. We had a bunch of them. I think I stunned Reggie Brooks with the Irish Highball, how good it tastes, very refreshing, but also the fact that he didn't think I could actually make the drink myself. So I got back there as the bartender and made one for Reggie. So he was excited about it, but it's the perfect drink for tailgating. That's what we're going to call it, the tailgate. So if you don't know what that is, it's basically tailgating. Just incorporate tealing as your Irish whiskey of choice.
Oh, that's fantastic. Brady, thanks again for the time. And from the Notre Dame contingent, man, it's great to see one of our guys with the platform you have represent Notre Dame all over the country every week. You do a great job, and everybody's proud of you and the work you do on behalf of Notre Dame, man.
Oh, well, I appreciate you guys having me on. I appreciate you saying that. It's going to look a little awkward the next few weeks as I'm going to be in a walking boot. So we'll see how that looks with a suit and tie on. I'm still talking with the producers as to how we can kind of hide this, at least for the next few weeks, before I can put a shoe on and limp around somewhat comfortably.
Hey, you'll be a lot of behind the desk shots. Nobody will ever know unless they're standing behind you.
That waist up from there on out. So
thanks a lot, Brady.
Thanks, guys.